Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, registered dietitian and intuitive eating counselor. And today I have Franciska Kosman. Hi, Francisca. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I am such a fan of the work that you do because I feel like it's not enough awareness around this topic. And we all pretend like no one has issues with food when there's just so much around this and we don't talk about it enough. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Where do you live and what do you do?
So I live in Philadelphia currently,
Oh, wow.
and I am a podcast coach, podcast success coach. I started out as a musician. I play guitar and piano. I started writing my own music, and then I put out original albums. Then I built my own studio in my house, and I am working toward my last 4 albums of my 10 album goal
Wow.
currently. And I have segued into podcasting to build an audience for my music. And then I segued into helping other people build movements, audiences, brands around what they do through podcasting.
Awesome. That's so cool. So how did you get into your first career with music? Like you said, you played piano and guitar.
Yeah, I was classically trained in Moscow, Russia, where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
Big focus on the arts, a big focus on the discipline of just doing something extracurricular and focusing on that fully. I really enjoyed it. And we had a big department in our school, in our day school, with singing and dancing, performing. And I was part of that dance vocal ensemble where we released albums, we performed nationally and internationally. And the joke became I didn't get enough solos growing up, so I had to become a solo artist.
Oh, that's so funny. So when did you start learning how to do music? Like when you were like 3, 5, 10, like is it in your blood? Like your parents play music?
Um, well, I mean, kindergarten, they already have singing and dancing in your perm plays and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So I started piano lessons at the age of 6, and then guitar I added on at 12 in a proper music school where I had classical guitar, and then piano was a supplemental class. We had choir, solfeggio, music history,
Wow. Wow.
and
That-
exams. We had recitals twice a year
wow.
or 4 times a year. And that was just the music school part. And then we had the music in the school as well. And I participated in that probably since I was 7 or 8.
Wow. And your other siblings? Do you have other siblings? Are they also into music?
We were all a part of the group. So everyone either danced and sang or one or the other. I have 2 sisters. So we were all in it together.
So
My
cool.
older sister focused on visual arts. So she went to art school. My younger sister, I remember taking her to ballet classes. So she had her focus on dance. And yeah, my mother, that's how she kept us busy.
Wow, that's so cool. So then did you always know you wanted to like do it professionally, or you just decided like as you got older that like it more of like a passion, or it was something that you were always going towards as a career?
Yeah, so I did want to continue my education. I did understand, practically speaking, that unless I wanted to be a teacher, which I didn't, but I did teach privately music students for many years. I would have to do other things. I also went to Touro College. They did not have a music program. So I did
Wait, so
end up taking,
you said you grew up in Moscow. You came here for college or you came
so
here
I
for
went to seminary in Israel and then to college in America.
wow.
We all left home post middle school, high school, depending on the child.
Mhm.
And we knew we would be continuing our education in more mainstream Jewish communities. Um, so I took some classes at the Juilliard evening program when I was at Touro,
Wow.
and I continued just developing my music, but I understood unless I majored in music, like in Queens College or Stern also had a music program, that wasn't a professional career I wanted to pursue, just because teaching would be the obvious option, because performance is not really an option for Shabbos observant Jews.
Right. Right. Wow. So what did you end up majoring in?
Business.
Business. Okay, so that makes sense.
Marketing and management.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah. Shout out to Dr. Michelle Tendler, who taught many of the classes I took.
That's awesome. So you grew up in Moscow basically your whole life until you went to seminary, and then you went to Turo.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess you grew up speaking English.
I grew up speaking English. My mother's from the States. Yeah.
Your English you don't really have an accent. I don't even hear your accent a little bit.
Thank you.
Very cool. That's really cool. So then when did you start like producing your own music?
So I started when I was already in Moscow. It was really just going from the studios that we were doing albums for the school versus to I had my own money from, classes I was teaching privately, guitar or piano, and then getting myself into the studio to work on my own songs. I continued that in Israel and then also in the States. And then eventually I transitioned into being able to do it on my own.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Or primarily on my own.
Right. Did you see yourself doing that? Like when you were in like high school or seminary or college, like, did you see yourself making your own music, putting out your own albums? Like, do you perform live? Like, do you do live performances, or you do mostly like, I know you have music videos on YouTube.
So I prefer the recording artist track. However, I did perform live many times. A bittersweet experience. It's a lot of energy. It's usually nighttime.
Right.
I'm a morning person. I'm exhausted at night. So there were lots of practical reasons I did not want to keep pursuing it. Also, I don't live in such a mainstream Jewish community, so most of the gigs would require travel in addition to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't enjoy it enough to want to work so hard. But the recording artist part, I truly enjoy, and it energizes me that I can go into the night and not realize it's night.
Right.
And I definitely feel like I'm in my zone when I'm in the studio.
So you, like, once you had your own studio, or like your own, like, I guess when you got married or you had your own place. Yeah. It's so cool. You were like, hey, I'm gonna make a studio in my house, and I'm gonna work on my music and work on recording albums. And is it like, or do you sell them, or is it mostly
so it's all on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, all the places, YouTube. Did I say YouTube?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's available. I'm coming out with a new remix of my Shiru song this Motzei Shabbos in honor of Pesach. So, and I'm working on my first English album. So for me, it's the chase of like learning something new, trying something new, and really finding my genre and my style. So
did you get any pushback from the community, or like from anyone that, like, this is not like the place for like a frum girl, or from like your family, like, or was it like you were always like welcomed with open arms?
So mostly I was welcomed with open arms, at least from the people that matters. There have been way back when pushback on some of my music videos, how the people were dressed, or how the dancing was too much or too hip hoppy. So we had some of that. Even now I'll ask, some of my close loved ones if they liked my latest music video, and then I'll be like, you tolerated it, right? Just because it's not in the spirit, how we envision our tznius, role models, whereas the way I view the women in Tanakh and in our history, they weren't, women who just sat and hid in the kitchen. They were, fighting. They were out there really being powerful or empowering women, doing things that sometimes the men didn't have enough courage to do. Mm-hmm. And so many of our stories end up with the woman saved the day, mm-hmm. like Purim, right, and Hanukkah. And I find that very, very empowering to use these role models to sing today because we won't have the men singing about them, right?
Right. Right.
And we don't have to pretend like there's one way to be tznius or there's one way
Right.
to be Jewish from women.
Right. For sure. I think that's what your music does represent, like from, at least from what I see, like that there's so many different ways to interpret, a Jewish woman, really.
And it's so nice when women do enjoy being in the kitchen or behind the scenes.
Right.
It's easier for them. Their life is easier when they prefer it.
Right.
But
It's true.
so many really struggle with that today.
I
And
actually, yeah, it's
and
funny
it
that you say
doesn't say
that.
that in the Torah that your mouth has to be shut and you can't say
Right.
anything and you can't sing anything.
Right. I
That's not a
actually,
Jewish concept.
right. From like, I'm one of nine, I'm the fourth of nine. And I remember having this conversation with my therapist a lot about like how I'm not one of those types of moms that like to sit on the floor. I'm not like, I mean, I love my kids with all my heart, but like, I'm not, and I happen to like being in the kitchen, but like, I like, I like talking about business or things like that. And like, I remember saying to her, she's like, there's different ways to be a mom. Like, you don't have to do that. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, well, what if I was born like 400 years ago and I didn't have a choice and I couldn't just go out and work? She's like, that doesn't really matter because you weren't born 400 years ago. So like, Hashem knows what he's doing, I guess. Like we all have our own strengths. And I think that that's also like today's generation where like women are becoming so empowered to like do whatever they're capable of doing or like that they're good at, what speaks to them.
Yeah. I think that's ultimately the most important thing for us to figure out. When are we energized or activated? Because that's what's important for our kids to see in us.
Mm-hmm.
If we try to change our nature to like fit some profile of what a mom is supposed to look like, or we're trying to be that mother next door that seems to always have fresh cookies ready on a Friday afternoon, then kids pick up on everything. They
Mm-hmm.
see us. We don't need to explain anything. They know everything. So if your child experiences seeing you energized, activated, passionate, purposeful, they will grow up knowing their mother has more depth to her. There are things that are important to her instead of just trying to fit a profile and never feel alive. Or
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I just had this conversation with a client yesterday that she was saying, so a lot of times in my practice, I'll teach clients about like the hunger fullness scale. So like what does hunger feel like? What does fullness feel like? And we'll talk about like really getting in touch with your physical signs of hunger fullness, right? So they work on that for a little. And then I like to talk about self-care and how if you're lacking in self-care, so food could sort of like become your self-care, right? So like once like they practice the hunger fullness cues and they really know, like I feel, when I get like rumbling in my stomach or in my head, like everyone's so different, they're able to like identify that. And they're like, okay, I know I'm eating because I'm not from hunger. Like they could identify that. So there's something else, right? So we were talking about like things that fuel her. And she was just like so had never explored that. Like because she's like, my rule as a mother is to take care of my children. And I was like, I wonder where you picked that up. Like, I wonder where you got that belief system from. And she's like, that's how my mother raised us. That's a woman's role. And she's like, but I really like to paint, she's like, I just thought like you just paint as a kid, like for fun. Like you can't do that as an adult. And I was like, right. Like that's your beliefs. That's a belief system that you've picked up. Right. So like, I always say, like, does that serve you? Does that belief system serve you? So like, of course there are mothers who are fueled and passionate, and we all should be passionate about raising our kids, of course, but like there's so much outside of just like mothering our children, cleaning for our children, cooking for our children, and like that fuels us, that makes us better mothers, like that ignites us.
For sure.
So tell me about the podcast. How did that start?
So for anyone who already heard my story so many times, I'll just repeat it once again. But it was right after my
I never heard it.
That's why I won't spare any details.
Okay, good.
I released my Shiru music video and then the Atatakum music video. It was a bunch of thousands of dollars in deep. And that's when it hit me. I'm not going to get what I want out of the music the
Mhm.
way I'm going now. And the Jewish female market is not giving me what I want in terms of its reception and viewership and interest. And there isn't a market, or if there is, they don't know about it. They're unaware of it. And Rivka Harris, I consider her a dear friend and mentor, told me to start a podcast. And I was in a place where I was like, I'm done with music. I'm just done investing in this, trying.
Were you making money or were you just losing money?
Yeah, exactly. I was losing money.
Wow, that's so
that
hard.
will make you your passion feel like a depression. So I started the podcast as a way to interview other women in the arts and entertainment, figure out what they're struggling with, what's their journey like. I just assumed everyone else who was posting on Instagram was successful. When I say successful, I mean financially successful.
Okay.
What I did come to learn is that most of the women were doing this out of passion, also not making money from their music videos per se, maybe from some performances, but it wasn't something that was supporting them. And a lot of them were also very frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, we built a community, an audience, a market there, and then we pushed enough boundaries for people to start putting out music videos and getting, high-paying gigs who are in mainstream communities in Lakewood and Brooklyn, and to be considered totally normal in the community, not something that's very controversial or rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely feel like I participated in pushing the boundaries to create that sense of normalcy and acceptance around women putting out music and music.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So basically you were working in the field of making Jewish female music videos and you weren't making any money, you were losing money. And I guess your expectation was that like it would make you money. Like,
I don't know if I had any expectations to begin with. It wasn't a business model. It's not like I had a strategy and the strategy failed. It was just like, I'm going to do this. I'll get famous. Gigs will come or something will come,
mm-hmm.
and it will pay for it. It will make itself. It will pay for itself. But it doesn't happen on its own. You usually have to go out and create something around it. So some people have merch, others have, recording studios, others teach vocals or music instruments, and they have supplementing businesses that support their music brand.
So you mean most people don't make money just by making music videos, or you mean most from women don't?
Yep, music videos, you get a royalty, but it's not enough to pay for the music video unless you are, Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. But
performances can
performances
pay for
make the
things,
money. So it's
but
like,
they're not going to pay your bills. They'll maybe pay for your musical projects.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting because I went to a performance this year by a Jewish artist, and she was really amazing. And there were so many women there. I guess she has to pay everyone involved in the music, in the show, but I can't imagine she didn't make a lot of money from it. But I guess there's so much.
And she could have, but the cost of putting on a show and paying your dancers, your lighting, the venue, the tickets, the marketing, whatever can be involved. And then she needed her backing tracks. Maybe she had to pay for the music. Mm-hmm. And all those years of investing. So even if she does make a couple of $1,000s that night, mm-hmm. compared to the money and the time and everything she's invested over the time to put on a 40-minute performance where she's splitting half of that money with a bunch of people, right, or whatever it is, it's not paying for her electric bill or for her kids' tuition. That's what I mean.
Right.
It might pay for her, next gown or her next laser appointment, wow. Something extra, even if it does. But usually the music, going into the studio, let's say you don't write your own music and you need to buy a song, you need to license a song. Before you even have the song, you're already spending money.
Right. Wow. That doesn't sound very lucrative.
But that's something I learned by asking dozens of other women in this industry, because just me on my own journey, I just thought I wasn't doing well.
Right.
But then when I learned that's what the industry is like, it was very helpful. But we
Right.
did build an interest around Jewish music, and there is a community, there's a collegiate space now, and there's so many women providing and doing the music. There are a lot of women interested in the music and enough people to hire people. So I definitely feel like we've built a movement here, and that's very fulfilling to know
Right.
that happened.
So your goal for the podcast was really to gain from your interviewees, to learn from you, learn from them, they learn from you, and you put it out there for any other struggling artist type of thing.
So yeah, I didn't have those goals going in, but we ended up building a movement. I ended up doing research, building relationships, building a database of
You
so
do
many
that,
women.
like you just had to, like that's also takes research. Like how did you? I guess you learned on the job, or like did you have a mentor? How did you learn how to do that?
How did I learn how to do a podcast?
No, how did you learn how? Like
How
kind of
to
like it was a
No,
strategy,
I
right?
knew some other artists, and then
Right.
you meet artists, and then they'll tell you about other ones, or new ones are popping up, and then you see
Right.
their new music video. So it was very organic. I started out 2 interviews a month. I did that for about 2 years until I upped it to every week. And then I branched out into Jewish taboo topics.
Right. So that's a whole other, your podcast definitely took a turn. So
Yeah.
how did that come to be?
So I had a little transition. I added on a series called No More Silence, where I interview survivors of abuse. I just woke up one day and decided I wanted to do that.
Really?
Yes, that's exactly how it happened. I talked to a lawyer because I didn't want to be, sued, or if people are bringing up allegations or anything like that. I needed to make sure I'm protected. And then I started looking for guests, which unfortunately wasn't so hard. People would come on. I gave an option to stay anonymous. And that for me was very obvious. I was giving women who didn't have a voice in the Jewish Orthodox community a voice. And I was giving people who went through abuse and survived. I was giving them a voice. And then eventually, and that was super successful. And it was so fulfilling because it was helping so many people, the guests, as well as the audience members. Even if the audience members aren't abused, they are raising children. They want awareness and education around it.
Yeah.
And I was doing that way before it was popular to talk about it. And then I started getting requests to talk about other topics as well. And it just became giving people a voice and a platform to talk about things we don't have a space anywhere else to talk.
So was it really like one day you woke up and you were like, I have a platform and people listen to me and I should share other people's stories, or something went on in your personal life or in like the Jewish community that like got you thinking about that?
It's probably a combination, because I do have that personality that people do share whatever's going on with them. And this topic, so many topics that I cover on the podcast are very sensitive, and people who know me also know I'm very unfiltered. I'm very comfortable talking about uncomfortable topics, which makes people sharing comfortable enough to share around me. And one day it just clicked, like, wow, I have this podcast. People are really comfortable around me. Let's try to combine that and do some good with it.
But did you also do you still interview artists on the podcast? Is it both?
I actually have an episode with Esther Freeman coming out soon. I've been waiting to release that for a little bit. And oddly enough, I'm on this chat with a bunch of Jewish singers and very talented artists. There's an open invitation. I've invited Bracha Jaffe on. I've invited on a bunch of other singers. It's hard to pin them down. They have to cancel. Things come up. So I would love to have any artists who want to talk about their journey, but I've exhausted the part where I was getting my natural guests booked and recorded without it compromising my workflow. Let's put that. There's a combination of passion and work that goes into this. So once it's off balance, I have to pivot a little bit and feel, tune into whatever is flowing into my space.
Right. So did you feel like you gained a lot from the series of interviewing other artists? Like, did you feel like that really helped you learn about the industry?
Yes, absolutely. I felt like I positioned myself in the market, which is something I really wanted. I built a lot of relationships because after we're done interviewing, we would continue our conversation and then the relationship. And that's very valuable in this industry, just being able to talk to each other, support each other, ask questions. So, and then I was able to give them a platform to talk about their journey, which was so nice for me because I was ultimately giving back and sharing my platform with others. And it made it much more, it was like an extension to the music I created.
And then you said like one day you woke up and you're like, hey, like this fits my personality. This fits my mission to interview people who no more silence, who had been abused. And you were able to really like shed light on their story and I guess the community story. And that was well received. And then you said people were reaching out to you about other taboo topics. So how did they just like DM you on Instagram or email you or like about anything, like a topic that they were personally going through or a community member or family member?
Absolutely. So like that, it would happen over a Shabbos meal or another social gathering. And I'd get introduced to people and then it would be like, oh, why don't you talk about this? And then I consider myself an activist. Music was the first thing I was passionate enough to do something publicly about, which is moving and changing the boundaries or our ideas about the halachic boundaries for women in singing. And then it moves on. I talk about get refusal and the aguna crisis and shidduchim and, so many other topics that are either shameful or uncomfortable or need a voice. And I feel the sense of mission to continue talking about these things. For one, I don't feel like my kids are threatened to be thrown out of school. I don't live in a community where that's an issue. And on the other hand, I have this deep desire to do something that's meaningful that I can bring to the table.
And you've gotten like a lot of positive feedback on like the taboo topics that you're able to share on your podcast.
Yeah. And that's really how I've been able to do it for so long. If I wouldn't be getting the feedback, and I always tell my audience, thanks to you, we're growing. Thanks to you, this is continuing. Because I work with a lot of podcasters. They launch, they do a few episodes, and then it dies out. It's very hard to continue putting in so much work.
It is.
If you feel like it's not being received. Right. So the proof to what I'm doing is doing something is the fact that I'm still doing it. And we're hitting 5 years in November. So I'm just so deeply honored.
Wow, that's amazing. Where do you see the podcast going? Like, do you see it going that people just reach out to you for things that that there's a need and you're able to fill that, or do you have like another sort of
my other thing is my little antenna I have on, and whenever I speak to people or meet people or I see something happening in the world, I take that as a cue to take that on and start talking about that more in depth or finding guests. Very often there's a topic I feel like is happening. For example, when I went through and I experienced my miscarriage, I felt like I should talk about it. Didn't talk about it right away, but I did use my podcast to find other people to talk about their experiences or bring more awareness around it to women and men, and just use, whatever I see going on either in my world or people around me to bring awareness.
I'm really sorry to hear about that.
Thank you. But I've recovered since, but I can definitely access that pain.
Right. For sure. No, I think that it's a really interesting balance of like sharing and oversharing, like on social media, because like there's so much that we gain from sharing, the person who's sharing and the people who like feel seen and heard from other people's experiences. At the same time, there's so much like oversharing. You know what I mean? Like on
Well,
social
my
media.
balance was I put out a music video that I dedicated to my loss.
Wow.
But it was around the time I was having my next baby. So it
Right.
took a long time.
Wow.
And I didn't talk about it publicly for a while after. But then once I felt comfortable enough, then it didn't feel like oversharing because it felt
Right.
like I wasn't like I had something
Processing.
positive to add.
Right. 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 I feel like Brene Brown talks about this, about like, what does she say? I can't remember. I have to look it up. Like processing versus, I don't remember. Like there's like sometimes people use the internet to like process their pain, and sometimes they really have done that in like privacy or whatever, however they want to. I mean, I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. I'm just saying everyone like does whatever they're comfortable with. But
I'm just saying,
something,
whatever I'm going through now, people won't know about it,
right, right, right,
for another
right,
year,
right,
potentially
right,
through my content. Yeah.
right. No, but I feel like that's also like definitely coming from a place of like an artist, like artists, like whether people are like drawing art or making music as art, um, it's very much a part of that, like being able to share, being able to share your music or share your drawings or share your writings. That's like so much a part of the art, no?
Yeah. Trying to make something meaningful out of something personal.
Right. Did you ever read the book by David Kessler, the 5 stages of grief?
No, but I know a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he added like a 6th stage, like making meaning. So it's like really
Right.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. You'll look up my content when, after this, and we'll continue our relationship. But I also I lost my mother a few years ago, and I didn't like really share on social media for a few months, maybe a year. And like I remember when I shared, like I was ready to share, and it was very healing. Like so many people reached out, like I didn't know, or like I also suffered a loss, or thank you for sharing, thank you for being open about your pain. And actually I just did the interview before you, I did on the topic of IFS, internal family systems, which is like a therapeutic modality. And the person who I interviewed, Shira Fruchter, was just saying that in a lot of communities, like we're all just pretending like life is great, like life is perfect, and like it's so exhausting. Like we need space to be able to talk about like the pain. Obviously
And
we don't
be
have to talk
real.
about it all. Yeah, be real. Like we're all struggling humans.
Yeah.
So I really do appreciate your podcast in that way, and I've listened to a lot of episodes already on people sharing about their own journeys.
Thank you. It means
Really
so
cool.
much.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's like really, really important that the community has that safe space, and they're able to talk about it anonymously or share their names if they want to.
Yeah.
So totally whatever you're comfortable with, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your relationship with food, because we spoke about that a little bit before we started recording. And I mean, that's like definitely my passion. So like if you would you feel comfortable to share like where you're
Sure.
where you're holding in your relationship with food journey?
So it doesn't feel like a question I could answer in 3 sentences, but in short, I've always had a complicated relationship with being able to feed myself. So planning, executing the eating, and being happy and satisfied with the decisions, with the experience. And it's something I've been both struggling and working on and off for my whole life.
Your whole life since you were like 2, since you were like a baby?
So my earliest memories around food are probably middle school, where I wouldn't eat the school lunch in Russia. And anyone who's American or Israeli will be like, of course you didn't want to eat, the fish soup and the whatever
I
else
would
they
never eat
served,
that.
which was a
Yeah.
very wholesome meal. If
Right.
I think back now, what my kids are getting at hot lunch, which is, the unhealthiest, CRAP, but she's
Mhm.
eating it and she's happy. And I know how picky my kids are. So at least they're eating it. I don't have to worry about it. On the other hand, we had soup, we had hot meals, which were like mashed potatoes and ground meat, all these different things every day. And, it was subsidized by the state and the school. Like it was completely free to the kids. And
And most of the kids ate it? Like it wasn't like,
everyone basically ate it. At one point, I would eat chocolate instead of lunch.
Mhm.
At one point, I was running the school canteen during lunch. Lunch was 15 minutes. We had 15 minutes for the boys' lunch, 15 minutes for the girls' lunch because we had separate lunches. I
Mhm.
ran the canteen during both lunches. So my food wasn't a priority to me. And it was always hard for me to decide, what to eat when it was time to eat, and a lot of regret around my choices. And not just, it wasn't necessarily calorie based. It was like my experience wasn't as enjoyable as I would have wanted it to be. Like food was a big letdown very often.
You thought you were going to enjoy it more, and then when you would eat it, you'd be like, ew, that was
It
gross.
felt like a waste of a meal, a waste. Yeah.
Do you think that came from like society or like messages in your home that like food should always be like taste amazing, or like where do you think you that?
So with doing lots of therapy and thinking, I think I used food as my tool to release as much control as I could, or take as much control over my life as I could. So if I was too overwhelmed with school and music school and all the other things I was occupied with, food was something I used to overly control, overly expect a lot of pleasure from, and perfection.
And your
Whereas
others,
other areas of my life, I was able to let go of the perfection level or the expectations.
and your other sisters didn't struggle with that?
So my older sister is vegan since she's 12. So I tried being vegetarian for a few years. I don't remember when it ended. Clearly, I didn't make too much of a moment out of it. She's still vegan. My younger sister, I mean, besides for having an average relationship with food like every other person I know, she seems to be great managing her steaks and all other foods. And I don't think she has any like food restrictions or allergies or aversions.
And now, like, could I ask how old you are, or how many
I'm
years?
29.
29. Okay. So, like, now, where do you stand on your eating, like your food aversions? Like, are you able to challenge yourself to eat foods that you don't love? Like, are you like most days, like you're not able to eat so much, or you're still struggling with getting more pleasure from food?
So I was able to categorize or at least identify those issues. And I've been categorizing foods into separate categories and numbering them on a scale from 1 to 10, how tolerable they are for me or not. So I can, the ARFID.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm doing treatment for that.
That's what I was thinking when we spoke like last time, because people don't really know much about that eating disorder, ARFID, but it's really just like many, many, many food aversions. And it usually does happen in childhood. And a lot of it is just exposure therapy.
Right, exactly. So I have like textures and portions and proportions, and how it feels and how it looks and how it smells. There's so many elements to be able to enjoy one meal. And then on top of that, I have this extra element. If it's done by somebody else in an appetizing way, I eat it no problem. Obviously, like if somebody makes me food and I have no idea where it came from, and for all I know, they live in the forest, I won't want to eat that food. But most of the time, if I know it's coming, for me, not knowing how the food was prepared or seeing how the food was prepared is much easier to eat the food. So any packaged food or any, restaurant food or, grocery pre-made food, it's much easier for me to eat versus something I prepare myself. So that's the extra element. Even if I would enjoy a meal, if I made it, it's harder for me to even eat it.
I've heard that many times, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a way around that? Like, are you able to buy food, like pre-made food a lot from the grocery store? Are you able to have other people in your house prepare the food?
So yeah, we're using all the combinations possible so we could get through every day. But I don't feel like I have a system yet that works. It still feels like trial and error, still feels like But, you know, I don't go to sleep hungry.
Right.
We figure something out.
Right.
It's just very frustrating that I have to deal with
Frustrating.
this hard work on a daily
Right.
basis so many
Right.
times.
For sure. It's super frustrating because you have to eat every single day, no matter what. And it's sad because food could really give people so much enjoyment.
Yeah.
And to have like so much anxiety around it could be really, really like frustrating and decrease your quality of life. So I have seen this many times, you know.
And
I don't
there's so much
specifically
judgment also. Like, I'm an adult. I figured everything else out, like how to do as an
judging
adult.
yourself, self-judgment.
Yeah, and there's self-judgment of like, why can't I figure this out? Other people much younger than me are in dorms and feeding themselves, and it's not even a thing, and I'm struggling with it. So understanding it, acknowledging it, and sort of having more compassion
Mhm.
was another element that you know, implementing.
Yeah. I mean, ARFID is a real thing. So like it's not like you chose that, you know, to be struggling with that. So it's not really your fault. And like it's definitely one of those things that you look around and you're like, oh, they're not struggling with it at all. Like, why can't I get it under control? But it's like that's just like the nisayon that you were handed in life, you know, even though like it's so easy to judge ourselves and be harsh with ourselves. But that's so much of this work is like grace and self-compassion. Like that just works better anyways, you know, like the more we like beat ourselves up, like the worse off we are.
Yeah.
Were you like forced to help with food in the kitchen as a kid? Like, did you have to be around food more than you wanted to do as a kid? I'm just curious.
No, so I did have the sous chef job around Yantif. My
Mm-hmm.
sister would, you know, take on, she loved cooking and baking, and she would take on recipes, and I would just be the sous chef, and I'd peel things. And so I did bake. I made, you know, the Shabbos chocolate cake every Thursday for a few years, which I was happy to do. Baking is easier than cooking. And it's not easier. It's easier for me to eat what I baked than easier to eat what I cooked. What was your question? If anything, I remember my mother prioritizing my music lessons over me helping around Erev Yantif because there was enough people in the kitchen making Yantif, and I had a, you know, a class or whatever it is. And my mother said, you know, she's whatever, 13, there's enough help. We have everything under control. She should go to her class instead of missing it.
Did you have trouble with like textures and smells and stuff like that outside of food? Like, were you a sensory kid? Like not wanting to touch certain things, not wanting to smell certain things?
I can't think of.
Not that you
I
remember.
mean, smells for sure. If you get in a subway and it smells, I would
Right.
not appreciate that.
Right.
But I didn't have. I've seen some other more extreme reactions to other sensory issues, and
Right.
you know, I do not think I had that.
Right. So interesting. I guess it's just helpful for people to hear, like,
if you take the guitar and you like play it in a, you know, if you touch the strings horizontally back and forth, that sound irritates my teeth a lot.
Right. The like the chalkboard.
Yeah.
Chalkboard. Yeah. No,
but
that's
if I ate a sandwich that was covered in foil and I would bite off, the foil would definitely destroy the meal for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel like people don't really know about ARFID. So like it's interesting just to shed light. That could actually be like a really cool topic on your podcast, you know, because like you said in the beginning that so many people aren't talking about this. I think more people are talking about it. Like it definitely is becoming like much less of a taboo in the community. At least that's what I see.
So they're talking about it, but I don't see so much change culturally because
Right.
we're still making massive kiddushes, and we're going into like Yantif season where the Seder starts at 9 p.m. You're not eating until 11 or 12.
Right.
For somebody who's on a diet or trying to watch their weight, you know, Pesach can be a very resentful experience religiously because you're like, I'm doomed and there's no way I can, you know, even if you have your discipline and you eat the amount of matzah you have to for matzah and then for korech, and then you eat the afikomen, even without a massive shulchan aruch, you've overeaten what you needed to, and it's late at night. Then it stretches out your stomach. Next day, you're even hungrier because you ate so much undigestible food.
I hear you. Well, I guess from my angle, like I talk about intuitive eating, which is much more about like making peace with food, because there's so much like diet culture restriction type of talk in our community, not just in the frum community. I mean, it's everywhere. It's culturally in the entire world. So yeah, there's that combined with like religious, like Jewish law, like just
There's so
that,
much. There's fleishiks and milchiks. There's not eating before kiddush or
right,
between,
right,
Shal Shuddas and Havdalah. There's so much. Fast days.
right. That all needs to be dealt with with a Rav. You know what I mean? Like just from somebody, like I do work with some clients with eating disorders, disordered eating. Like it's really one of like the most important pieces is that like to ask your shilas about like your specific situation. Just like with certain medications people have to take on Pesach or whatever. That's the same level of importance when you're struggling with your relationship with food and
Right.
like that interferes your religion.
Mm-hmm.
um Anyways, this was really really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that it's helpful for people to hear like about your food issues. Like I really appreciate you sharing that. I know like a lot of my clients are struggling with similar or different but still food issues nonetheless, and like I guess that's part of your brand and your podcast, that like you're really trying to shed light on the human experience.
Experience.
And your story was really cool, and your music videos are awesome, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure, thanks for coming on. Have a great day and a
You
beautiful
too.
Pesach.
I mean, you too.
Okay, thanks.